In this tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to use a mask to mask the neck of your metahumans out of any interpenetrations, or using a height mask to mask the entire neck with a gradient. And we are doing this to stop things like this from happening. When we have poking out the neck of the metahuman, and that is not the body is being masked by the wardrobe, but we still have the neck, so we need to do a couple of things. So let's go ahead and jump into the m_skin unified baked material. This is the master of the instance that the metahuman is using in the face. And what we need to do is go ahead and do the very first step, which is creating our static boolean parameter. So right click, static bool parameter. You want to name it whatever you want. This is going to be the very first on and off boolean that you're going to have, and you're going to connect that straight into this node. Now this node is called the name reroute declaration, so we can simply type reroute declaration, and we're going to add a name reroute declaration node, and it looks like this. You can name it whatever you want. This is essentially a pass-through node. It's going to store everything we're doing on the left, and it's going to store it on it. And then once we've done that, we are going to call this reroute declaration, and we're going to add it here, and we're going to do in this case use neck. You're going to use the name now. You're not going to create it again. You're going to use the name, and you see how it doesn't have an input and it only has an output. Now at this point, you're not going to have this use neck mask, so we're just going to leave this here. And let's go ahead and jump into mf skin baked inputs, which is a material function, and all the work we need to do is in here. Let's go ahead and hunt down our work, and this is essentially, and I'm going to stop here so you can pretty much do this by yourself if you know what you're doing. This is essentially all the node structure that we are going to be using. So from left to right, we are starting bringing in the texture coordinates, which is texture coordinates, super simple node. Now from that texture coordinates, we're using a mask, and that node is called mask, and it's going to be component mask. And you see that this one, the original, says RG, and this one says G, and that is because I twirl it down, the G, which is the green, right? So we're just masking the green. You can see that if we twirl it down. Now from that mask, we are going to go into a multiply node, and then in the V is where we are starting to create our very first parameter. So in this case, we can hold down 1 in our keyboard, and that's going to create a float value, and then we right click on it and we convert it to a parameter. In this case, I converted it to a parameter and I called it mask height. And it's very important that these are the values of this mask height if you're going to use this math here. Now if you want to recreate a linear gradient yourself, that's perfectly fine, it's going to work. But on the parameter that we created when we did mask height, you need a default value of 0.5, a minimum of 0.5, and a maximum of 1. And I also suggest you move the material expression to the group baked inputs. That way we are going to be seeing that information all the way up here in the baked inputs. As we wire the multiply with a linear gradient, which is again nothing too fancy, linear gradient, just a simple node. And then that V on that linear gradient, which is the horizontal, we are going to go into a 1 minus. Now from that 1 minus, we go into a cheap contrast, again cheap contrast, and down here we are going to set the contrast at a set value of 50. We're currently doing the multiply here, and that multiply is going to be for a value of 3. Now these are all set values that I tested and they work, and then we're going to bring all of these wiring from the multiply into the true of a switch. But this one is important because this is a static switch, and it's not the parameter. In this case, we don't need it parameterized. So this is the static switch. That's the one we need. So we're going to multiply, and we're going to go into the true with that one. And in the false, we are going to wire add texture. So we're going to hold down T, and we're going to click anywhere, and we're going to get a texture sample. Now once we get it as a sample, we need to right click on it and convert it to a parameter so we can then access it through our material instance. And we are going to wire this neck opacity mask, that's the name I put on it, RGB, into the false. You can grab any texture in Unreal and I'll show you how to use it. In fact, let's go ahead and get it as a default, and it is called default texture. So if you leave it as is with a default texture, which is this one, you are now able to use this parameter and replace it with any other texture. And again, I'll show you how that works. And we're going to do the same thing with the texture. We're going to move it to baked inputs, and that way we also see that texture popping up here along with all the other things that we can change on a instance, which is great. And once we've done all of that, we see this gradient texture neck mask. And now this is the input that we are going to be using, but we haven't created it yet, so we can't add it here. So what we need to do is go all the way to the left, and here where we see all the inputs, which if we go back to the material, we see that the inputs are all of these, right? The inputs that this function can use. So we're going to go once again back into that function, and we can see that we have use mipmap, use vt, and use input udim. In this case, we are going to create this one. This one is the one I myself created. So we need a static Boolean input. So we're going to do this static bool. And again, this is not an input, so we need to use this as an input, and we can't right click on it, we can't do anything like that. So we need to input, and we need to use the function input, and this is exactly what we want. And here on the details of it, on the input type, we need to go ahead and find what we are trying to use, which is again a static Boolean. Now that we have that, we can rename this, and that as soon as it's up and running, we're going to save. You'll see that if I go out, we have a new input for this material function, and this is where you connect this information that we're going to feed through this reroute that we are then feeding here into the material function to then store into this new reroute that we can finally use as a true or false value. So essentially, we created a static that we can turn on and off. We store it into a reroute. We use that reroute as an input into our function. As we go into the function and check what the input is doing, that input is storing another reroute, and then that reroute is being used as the on or off switch between using either a gradient on the true or a texture on the false for this neck mask. So now that we've done all of that, we can turn off both of those, and we'll see here all the way to the top in the features that we have now gradient texture neck mask. And if we move this to the side, we'll see this is again in the material instance. If we click on the gradient texture, nothing happens. And if we click on the on or off, that remember, it's going to be on is going to be gradient, and off it's going to be texture neck mask. We see that nothing is happening, and that is because this material by default is opaque. So we need to actually go all the way down in the material instance, and in the material property overrides, we need to change the blend mode from opaque to masked. And once we do that, we now see that we are switching between the height mask, which is again on, we are using a gradient here on true, and then on false, we are using a texture. And you'll see that if we go down to baked inputs, we see neck opacity mask right here as the texture, and we can change this one. Or if we turn it on, we see mask height instead of the neck opacity mask. And you see that I can slide here. Now this here, the gradient texture neck mask features, that one is also needing to be moved, and that is going to live outside of the function. It lives here. So we're going to take a look at this one, and we're going to be moving that group into features so we can see it again all the way to the top, along with all of these other static Boolean parameters. So that is all the logic that we need to set up for this, and now you can see that this effectively works. So if you were able to follow along or create it at your own pace, we now get the ability to use gradient. Now, we notice that in here, we're not necessarily going to be able to fix this problem with a gradient, because as soon as we fix the front, we are getting this issue in the back. That means that we want to be using not the gradient option, but we're going to turn off the second one. We want to be using the texture option. Now, I said that you could use any texture here, and that is correct. But what you need to do is the following. You're going to have to create a new material, which is what I did here, and simply add any texture, literally any texture, to the base color of that material. So we're going to do this again. And in this case, we're gonna be doing a copy of any texture, quite literally any texture. So for example, this vertex color here that I have. That doesn't really matter. And we're going to call this neck mask texture. It doesn't matter. Absolutely any texture, I'm going to drag and drop, and I'm going to put it here. Now, what you need to do once you have this material is you're going to be adding this material to the head, only the head of your metahuman. So we're going to find our metahuman, go to face, and then you drag and drop a copy of the face of your metahuman into the world. And then you add the material that we just created, which is this one, you add it to that metahuman's face. So you have the same exact representation, right? So what we are going to be doing now is the following. We are going to first go back into the instance of our face material, and we are going to be opening the instance, and we're going to switch the neck opacity mask for that new neck mask that we just applied, right? So we're going to apply that. Now again, since opacity takes the information of blacks and whites, you are seeing how it's now taking the information of red as white and then black as transparent. And you're seeing this very strange effect. Now that's starting to do the work, which is perfect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to select the copy of our metahuman that we have there. And we're going to go back to modes, and we're going to go into mesh paint. We need to go all the way to the right to the textures tab, and we're going to go into paint. As we have paint, the first thing I recommend you do is you fill everything with white. So paint color is white right now, and we're going to click fill. Now we want to be getting rid of all this. Oh, the strength was of 0.5. That was a problem here. So again, select everything and just do fill with full-blown power. So now we're seeing that we have the entirety of our metahuman in white. Don't worry about that little line. That's just a glitch. It's not gonna do anything. And what we can do here, which is amazing, is now we're gonna switch to black, and we are going to start painting away. And you can see that as we paint away, the metahuman here is updating real time, and we're losing all that information that we don't need to be seeing of our metahuman poking through our chest. And that is all we need to do. We are painting the texture live of our metahuman. Maybe we went a bit overboard there, but you get the idea. And since we're painting just a frog, the back stays okay. And once we're done with this, we can just simply save. And again, we are altering this texture real time, and we're creating a mask real time. And then with shift click, we can start bringing back any pieces that we may have screwed up. So that's how you create two options for masks for your metahumans for the neck, so you don't see any poking.